start the recording because we will use this video or this experience in the future. So good morning. My name is Monique Colclough. I'm the Director of Programs and Initiatives at the Belk Center for Community College Leadership and Research at NC State. We are housed in the College of Education, and I welcome you all to joining us for data-informed decision-making using classroom analytics for student-centered decisions. Part of the amazing work that we're able to do at the Belk Center, if you were able to join us last week for the Dallas hearing lecture that was viewed or accessible through YouTube, is really to create a space where we are honoring the great work in North Carolina. We're creating opportunities for continued practical research. We are convening amazing folks like yourselves and others across the 58 community colleges to continue to leverage the expertise, leverage the inquiry of folks, both faculty, staff, educators, administrators, all to catalyze change. And so we kind of consider that our 3 C's, create, convene, and catalyze. And that's something that if you've had an opportunity to check out our redesigned website that just launched about 2 weeks ago, you'll see that prominently on our homepage. Our executive director is Dr. Audrey Jagger. She is our fearless leader and sends her greetings on my behalf, or on her behalf. I'm providing greetings to you all. We are really excited about the work in teaching and learning, particularly being able to leverage this webinar series as a complement for college leaders like yourselves to be able to continue the conversations that began in 2018 with the Dallas hearing lecture. And that lecture talked about changing community colleges and transforming them through faculty professional learning. The lecturer at that time was Dr. Karen Stout, who's the president and CEO of Achieving the Dream. And a short 4 years later, we have taken that call to action and created not only the 4 teaching and learning hubs that are led by 8 amazing faculty co-directors, but we also have begun this webinar series. And the we I'm speaking about is not just the Belk Center, but it is a peer of your own, Dr. Chantel Strickland Davis from Central Piedmont Community College, has joined us in this work, in part because of her passion for faculty and staff professional learning, her expertise. And so she and I have created this 7-part series. This is the 2nd webinar for this year. The remaining 5 will happen in the spring semester. We'll take a little break in December and January, and then reconvene everyone in February. So please stay tuned for the announcement for those additional dates. In this webinar, we're going to discuss the concept of accessible data as strategic institutional priorities. We'll also share how North Carolina Community College faculty, 3 in particular, and staff are leveraging the System Office dashboards as a tool for reflective classroom reflection, and improvement practices. We have 3 folks from your peer institutions from Stanley Community College and Central Piedmont who are going to be joining us in this discussion. And it's really intentional. It's one thing for us to share based upon our individual experiences, but it's really critical in this work that we highlight and leverage the actionable experiences, the expertise of your peers in the state. And so we have 3 folks who are with us today. I'm going to take a moment just to introduce them in no particular order. We have April Simpson, who is with us from Stanley Community College. She is in her 26th year of teaching, which is amazing if you think about all of the things that have happened in 26 years from a technology standpoint, from a governance standpoint. It's a wealth of information. She attended Pfeiffer University at a college at that time. She's also attended one of our peer institutions, the UNC Charlotte, in the university system. And she's been at Stanley Community College since 2017 in the role of mathematics department head, just before the world shifted a little bit, just a little bit with COVID. Joining her is her peer, also John Bowman from Stanley Community College as well. He's the program head of university transfer and the English department. He's been teaching in the community college system also for a decade, so a lot of change in that time as well. He started with Stanley full-time in 2015, so pre-pandemic. And he is also joined by our colleague, Dr. Tracie Clark from Central Piedmont Community College. She serves as the Senior Vice President for Strategy and Organizational Excellence. She began her career at Central Piedmont as a member of the faculty and currently serves as the college's Senior Vice President. In her current role, she supports the college mission. She supports her amazing president. She works directly with my colleague, Dr. Chantel Strickland Davis, by leading strategic planning, institutional research, accreditation, compliance, audit, and grant teams. So a pretty big lift. She's also published several articles and books on, or chapters in books around adult student success. So these amazing three people round out our internal North Carolina experts. And we are going to take an opportunity to ask three questions, and we're going to kind of volley and serve the question and answer. There is no right or wrong way to engage. The folks who are joining us, and thank you again as you all are still coming in, you're welcome to drop your questions in the chat. Both Dr. Strickland Davis and I will make sure that we get those answered. As you see, she's included that comment in the chat already. So again, welcome to you all. We're right on schedule. It's 9:06, and you've joined us for data-informed decision-making using classroom analytics for student-centered decisions. I'm going to kick us off by asking the very first question, and I'm going to ask Dr. Clark to consider starting us off with her answer. So our first question is, once a culture of data-informed teaching and learning has been identified and initiated at your college, how have you supported faculty in using the data dashboards and the data to make institutional practices and classroom decisions?
Good morning to all of you. It's exciting to be here, and thank you for including me in today's conversation. Definitely becoming a data-centered organization is important. It really is a priority now, particularly post-COVID, because we used to be able to just look at best practices across the country and give it a try. But now we really do have to be responsive to the trends and what's happening with our students, with our institutions as an organization. In terms of supporting faculty, a couple big things in particular that I like to make sure that I'm doing is making sure that there's the understanding of what really counts as a data set, because there's so much that's accessible. So for example, your attendance roster is a data set. If I could get my hands on everybody's attendance data on the 10% date, there's no telling what wealth of knowledge I can get. So as a faculty member, just looking at those tools that you have at your fingertips every day is important. With those system office dashboards, that's also a great reminder that you don't have to wait for certain points of the semester to be reflective and analyze some of the big picture trends. As Monique mentioned, faculty member at heart, started off teaching communication. And in my spare time, I enjoy looking at the COM 231 trends across the state. But because they're there in the system office dashboards, I go there into the curriculum course outcomes. I can see over time by demographics, look and compare institutions, the system office. And it's not one of those where I have to wait for someone to process a data request. I don't have to ask for special permissions or authorizations because it's all system level data, it's all de-identified, making sure that it's there. And there's that reminder that it's there and it's at our fingertips at any given time as a wonderful resource is something important I like to do. Another big thing is that I'm a proponent for looking at the data and being open to what it shares. So instead of saying, well, you know what, I think this is a good idea, let me find the data to support it. Coming from the classroom perspective, sometimes it's important to take the opposite perspective and shift that and say, well, you know what, let me look at the data around my class, my course, this collection of prefixes, and be open to what those trends might show that help with quality improvement, both within the classroom instructionally and with those additional supports we provide as well. So instead of entering it saying, you know what, I've got a great idea, let me use the data to prove why this is a great idea. Sometimes it's wonderful just to immerse yourself in the data and to be open what it introduces and what it shows us, especially now, because there are such differences with our students, with the trends, with what's going on. even just based on time of day with our students and their needs and how they're responding. So sometimes not always going in with, this is what I need, this is what I need to do, but going in with, well, let me be a minor. Let me explore. Let me see what the data points out and shows, and see if my colleagues have also seen those those trends within the data. So definitely those reminders that the data is accessible. You've got some of it at your fingertips every day, whether it's your roster, your LMS shell, or those system office dashboards. And to sometimes go in, instead of trying to use the data as a tool, let the data be your map to discovering that new path or creating new tools.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing those things. As I'm jotting down my own notes, these are reminders about things that are very easily accessible. John and April, what else would you like to add to the context for how, once the culture has been established, how data and data dashboards are usable, accessible, and making classroom changes, classroom practices?
So I want to say that I agree with everything that was just said a second ago. I think that that's very much the culture that we have here as well. We have a data-informed culture, and we know that we have access to the data in order to be able to make these types of decisions. Speaking from a faculty perspective, and as somebody who supports faculty members in turn, we look at that data in order to make those sorts of choices. Yes, we look at the data in order to be able to verify those choices. Are we on the right path? Are we doing the right thing? One recent example was our English 111 and 011 co-component, and we looked at that to make sure that we are actually supporting those students and to make sure that those students are being successful, to make sure that the choices we're making are accurate ones. Also, and I'm kind of preempting April just a little bit here, but the two of us have contextualization in our courses, and we have specific course structures that we both use and that we both follow. So my English 111 looks exactly like all the other English 111s that we have here. We went through that and standardized everything. I know that April has that as well, but just doing that and saying, hey, now everything is the same doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. It's also a matter of looking at that and saying, is this actually helping? Who is it helping? How is it helping them? And we have, again, that sort of data-informed culture here. The Center for Teaching and Learning, for example, will pick through our courses and say, you know, here are the places where things might drop off. Here are the places where students might drop off. And it helps to guide ways that we can reappraise those courses and ways in which we can re-engage with what we think we're doing and how accurate it might be. Again, I feel like I'm preempting April here slightly, so April, I know you're doing a lot of the same things.
We are. And I think probably for a college, as far as supporting its faculty, quite often, if you're not a numbers person, the word data can be very scary for folks, and not really knowing what to do with it when you hand it to them. So of course that support, those experiences in professional development and professional learning, to give them those opportunities of knowing, okay, here it is, here's what you need to do with it. Here's, so specific training on not only here it is, but what can you do with it? What do we do with the trends? What do we look at as far as things that may be progressing or shifting in a negative way or a positive way, and what types of changes can you do? Our college, I think, does a wonderful job in providing that support with, showing us where to access the data. We have, a professional development coordinator. We have, as John mentioned, the Centers for Teaching and Learning that we can go to. They have a wide range of providing professional development opportunities for us. Specifically to our department, they can cater to pretty much anything we ask for. And along with that, we have the institutional effectiveness director, who is wonderful with pulling data. So as far as speaking directly to the broad range of what we have going on, I think I feel extremely supported. If there's something I need, I know that it's out there. And I think that's important for all colleges, to make sure that your faculty, even those who aren't comfortable with the data, that feel like they can find help somewhere.
I really like what you said, April, or the question you posed. What can we do with it? It being the data we receive or have access to through the dashboards, through IR, as you all have highlighted, through rosters, through the LMS shell. It leads to kind of our second question, I think, which is what kinds of professional learning can faculty and staff receive to be more equipped in making data-informed decisions about student success and about learning, which is ultimately why we are all committed to this work. It's the success. It's not just the completion of a program, it's the completion of a certificate, it's the completion of a course. It boils down to some of those really granular things. John, would you like to kick us off with answering that question?
Sure. I have a couple different things that I would like to say about this, but I'm just going to lead with one and then sort of toss it over to everybody else, and I might circle back around toward the end. Of all people, for me to quote this morning, I'm going to quote Donald Rumsfeld, because I think that he said something that kind of applies in a situation like this. And I might butcher it slightly, might get it out of order because it's always a little confusing to you. But he said that there are known knowns. So these are the things that we know. And these are the things that we know that we know. And then there are known unknowns, which are the things that we know that we don't know, but at least we're aware that we don't know them, right? So in a case like this, how many students might be succeeding in a particular class? Okay, well, we don't know, but let's go find out. And then there are unknown unknowns, which are things that we don't know, and we don't know that we don't know them. So that's a little confusing, but I think that leads directly into to this particular question, because at the core, you have got to be able to support faculty and staff and be able to help them to identify the things that that they need to know, because they only have inside their own experience what they know already. And so if they don't know what their known unknowns or unknown knowns or whatever you want to call it are, how are they going to learn those things? Because until you sit them down, until you inform them, until you give them professional development that helps them to understand the possibilities, everything is just an unknown to them, right? They don't know that they don't know it, and they don't know that they have access to it. And so without that knowledge, without at least that parameter to set, yeah, that you're allowing them to fly blind. And I think what April said just a couple of minutes ago plays into that as well. There are some people who are somewhat terrified of data. Coming from an English background, I take responsibility for that as well. That was not my purview, but I've learned to become comfortable with it, and I've learned to know what I need to ask for when I need it, and I know where I can go to find that. And that is because of the professional development I'm talking about. Once someone made me aware that there was something out there that I could learn, that became that known unknown for me. So now I know, okay, here's the thing I'm trying to identify. Here's the thing, yeah, I'm trying to support. Let me go and find something that can address that. And with that information, again, that creates a whole range of different possibilities. Just as one quick example, again, I mentioned it before, but as we began to contextualize English 111, we wanted to make sure we were on the right track. And so this became a question of, okay, what kinds of things do we need to seek out? What kinds of things do we need to look at? We realized I had a particular instructor here, Sue Drake. She's sort of into this is her thing, but she realized that she could better support the EDU students because they were struggling traditionally with English 111. Once she realized that, she knew that she had particular kinds of data that she could seek out to support understanding that problem and to be able to better address that particular problem. And so again, without that knowledge, without the professional development associated with, hey, here are the possibilities, she wouldn't have known what questions to ask in the first place. So again, I have maybe a couple other things I'll say, but I wanted to lead with that because it might give some ways that other people could tackle this as well.
Thank you. It's very encouraging to hear that there's some commonality in something that I heard many years ago. One of our deans of students, when I was at Northern Virginia Community College at the Woodbridge campus, would always say, "You don't know what you don't know." And so I don't know if he borrowed that from Rumsfeld or if that's just an innate thing that he picked up, but it was one of the things that he would always say as we were talking about student success. You don't know what you don't know. So thank you for that commonality, I think, in our years of experience. April and Tracie, what else would you add to kind of what John has posed, or even answering some of the things that he has shared?
So, yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of John, we do some of, even though we're worlds apart in the English department, the math department, sometimes we say, but we do some of the very similar things. We, some of the major professional developments that kind of all tie in together, let me kind of run through those. Some of the professional developments that we have had is through our college writing student learning outcomes. And what we tend to do is almost a backward course. It is a backwards course design. And we use Quality Matters to write our courses. So of course we start kind of inside out. We write our outcomes and then our assignments, and then those kind of feed into our student learning outcomes, which address our general learning outcomes for the college. And so those things are critical in making decisions for our classrooms. And I'll kind of talk about some of the results of those things here in just a little bit. But as a department, we kind of look at that data, analyze those shifts or what things we're seeing happening in that information, and make decisions as far as, okay, what did we do in the previous year? What's affecting our data? Is it some outside force? Is it because, the world shut down and we all went home for COVID? Is that the reason this data is showing that trend? Or typically for the college, we just kind of compare for any documents we turned in last year, this year, but the department runs for every course we have. And we usually look at about a 3-year span of our information. And we look at what was done in previous years and what type of actions are we going to take in the next upcoming year to address any type of issues. And like I said, I'll mention some of those direct actions that we've looked at here in just a minute. But we've also had professional development on how to take those student learning outcomes and write assessment plans and feedback reports. And those are the things where we look at what types of actions will be coming up. But building off of what John said, not trying to be scattered, but it's kind of all ties together, so you're not really sure what to talk about first. We do in the math department, we homogenize our courses. So when you look at one course, they're all set up and designed the same way, which again stems from that Quality Matters and that backwards course design. So why is that important? We're not trying to take away from the freedom of the instructor, but what we do want to do is ease the student's comfort level when they come into a course. And so, if you take a 143 course, that course is going to look very much alike to a 271 course. And so how does that help? When we have our students that come in, if we're having students who are taking continuation courses, that gives them that comfort level. There's not the confusion of how do I start? What do I do? If you're, I might have 3 or 4 different adjuncts who are teaching a 143 course. So we have the same pace, the courses look the same. The students kind of feel more they have that welcoming. There is a transparency that they see within the courses. So I think that's very important to the success of our students is number one, when you first get into that course, are you already feeling overwhelmed or can I see myself at least making it through the first step? Or do I need to quit already? And so that's what we want to see is that them kind of sticking through that course. We don't want to scare them off the first day. And it does reduce that herding of the cats. If you've heard that, you kind of do a lot of herding of the cats at the very beginning. And I think because we have all of our courses that look alike and they have the same setup, we have definitely reduced our herding of the cats. And we have used our evaluations and student data that tells us, hey, the setup of the course was ease. We do base we take to heart the qualitative information that we get along with the quantitative information that we get. Typically, I know as a math person, it's kind of like you're saying but the qualitative information is very, very important. And I can get that through those evaluations or even in journal entries that our students do for our co-requisite courses. That is invaluable information as far as making decisions.
Yeah, as you were talking about the second to last point, I thought about my former hat as an academic advisor and how that demystifying and providing that vulnerability and encouraging students or providing the space where students are encouraged has got to be helpful for an academic advisor, whether it's a professional academic advisor who sits in student services or student affairs, or if it's a faculty-led advising scenario. that's got to be super helpful in that process, which is where sometimes our staff educators hear some of the most vulnerable notes about why a student doesn't want to continue. And it's because a faculty member has been able to take advantage of the real-time data, going back to, I think maybe you and Dr. Clark both said, not having to wait for an end of the semester opportunity. There are access points in the middle of the semester for there to be some formative evaluation that allows faculty to see this is really working and I need to continue with this. Dr. Clark, what else would you add to what John and April have shared?
It's going to sound like you and Dr. Strickland Davis did a dynamic job in picking speakers, because I love what John and April have said already. Because not only understanding what we know, but how do we find out if we don't know what we don't know, but also the importance of remembering all that's part of that experience and what goes into that. One of the things that we're working on right now is just simple data literacy training, and understanding that, and I'm not going to speak for all faculty, I'm one of those faculty members who's the worst student, because I want to know when I'm going to use this, how I'm going to use it, and why are you teaching it to me this way? If we've learned all these innovative practices, why are you just standing in front of me telling me what to do? Get me involved. And so we're keeping all of that in mind. But part of what I love so much about hearing both John and April is that with our data literacy training, in terms of the content, we've got our institutional effectiveness, institutional research team working on what that can looks like. And it's understanding charts, knowing the difference in formative and summative. What do you want to collect when? When is the best time to ask the question? Do you really know what you want? Let's talk about how to formulate that question so that we get something that you can actually use at the end, not just a spreadsheet. And so just talking about that and what that looks like so that we can offer it. But we are going to pilot it with our math faculty, because you all are the experts in that language. If you've got the content experts who know, because math is a whole other language. That's why some people are so apprehensive and wait until the end of their program to decide to tackle their math. Well, people look at data sometimes as part of that math as well. I'll just ask somebody else. Whatever they say, if it sounds like my experience, I'll double tap on it and we'll make magic happen in applying it, making it actionable. But our colleagues like April are the ones who are making it accessible for our students. And so using that knowledge to make it accessible for faculty across spectrums is wonderful. We're also piloting it with our English faculty. So that's why April and John are our ideal partners in this webinar this morning, because English faculty traditionally, because I majored in English too, but traditionally aren't the ones who want to hear all of the math talk. Give me the trends, give me the visualizations, and I'll apply it. But they're also going to be the ones who ask, but why? Why? And why? And sometimes we don't have the answer to the why in the numbers. The why is in, April mentioned it a minute ago, the power of the stories and understanding how and when to use the qualitative data to support the quantitative data. And that's something that I think that we could do a better job at making sure that we're pouring into our faculty, is that both are valuable and important. We do need to know those success rates in English 111. But instead of just saying this group of students is an outlier, well, what's happening with that group of students? Is this going to start to become the trend? Was there something that happened this semester? It's going to be our faculty. It's going to be those English faculty who say, well, wait a minute, no, we're not going to just keep those students in the margin. What's going on with them? And then we take it back to the math faculty and we say, help us to dig in. What's your experience like? Bringing faculty together so that you can see not only your consumers of the data, your creators, or can be co-creators of very powerful data sets as well, is something that's not really training, but it's something that I think that we're trying to be more intentional about, is making sure that we're not only acknowledging the power of the stories of the students, but some of those classroom experiences every day are going to be some of the most valuable data sets to answer why are we seeing this trend. We can look at numbers all day and all night, but knowing the story behind the numbers. We're working on developing a set. We've got a set of momentum metrics where we look at student progress in the completing English and math in the first year, accumulation of certain number of credits, whether full-time or part-time, fall to fall retention, as well as some success outcomes. And part of what we do when we look at that is not only do we look at how a cohort of students do, we break it up by gender, we look at it by ethnicity. And whenever we see those equity gaps, we're always asked, but why? And that's one of those things, I'm not sure if it was April, John, or both who said, well, it's one of those things where there's multiple variables. Let's make sure that we're helping people to understand there's not always one thing happening. There may be multiple things. But part of what excites me is sometimes that's part of the now known unknown. And we get to work together to figure it out and to understand it so that we're really making that impact on our students. And then, of course, I have to use my compliance voice and say, we also need to push our FERPA training, our HIPAA training, making sure we're using the data safely and securely. So I'll put in a plug for the not fun part of data too.
It's all fun when we're sharing with you all. Like, I have so many notes right now that I'm on my second or third piece of paper. I do want to highlight two particular things that I think are really salient and lead us to a resource that will be super helpful to many of us. The first, the comment about faculty are consumers of data and also co-creators. That should be on a commercial somewhere or some sort of a tagline, because it really does underscore what we heard in 2018 at the Dallas Hearing Lecture about how faculty are at the heart of transforming community colleges for student success. There is this multiple faceted identity of content expert, consumer of data, co-creator of data that I don't think we hear enough about. And so I'm going to make sure that this finds a special place somewhere in what we're doing next, because I think it's really, really valuable. And then there was this other piece that you all mentioned about, do you really know what you want as you're talking about data? And how do we help folks, faculty and staff educators, dig into what's accessible? One of the things that I did not share at the beginning was that we have an amazing colleague with DVP Praxis. And some of you might know her. Dr. Sarah Deal was at Central Carolina for a while. Then she moved on to the system office. And then she moved on to this research and evaluation organization, DVP Praxis. She's back in North Carolina physically. She wanted to join us today, but wasn't able to. She had a prior commitment, but she was able to share some slides with us that I think will be super important to this. Do you really know what you want? And so I want to credit her, and I'll make sure that we share this out with you all as well. But she posed a couple of questions, not even knowing what the three of you are going to say. This is just from her take based upon her work at Central Carolina, her work in the system office, and her work nationally with other community colleges and the Belk Center and other peer organizations across the country to do this evaluation and assessment work. And so she's given us 7 questions, I think I'm counting, 6 questions. Why might my college or subject matter be higher or lower than my peers? Are there contextual factors that are impacting this data? So that echoes what you all just said about it not being one thing, there being nuances within the data, both quantitative and qualitative, that we receive from our courses. Are there groups of students who have lower success rates? What factors might be impacting my students? Again, that nuanced identity, one of the significant campaigns that's happening right now in our state is the Adult Learner Initiative. So pulling back these folks who have stopped out, who are still trying to continue and juggle multiple identities, parent, caretaker, employee, full and part-time employee. And what are the factors that might be impacting their success? And that's something that we should be thinking about as educators. The second to last question, are there institutions that are doing really well that I can reach out to and learn more? There are 2 on this webinar right now, Stanley and Central Piedmont. great examples of folks that are doing the work that would be great resources to ask additional questions of? And then lastly, what is one thing that I can try out to see if it helps my students? And that goes back to the comments earlier about formative evaluation, not having to wait until the end of the semester to gather information from students to be able to make some adjustments. She also offered the things that we know exist, and you all have highlighted this as well, your institutional research office, your IR, or your data person in your department, or in your program, if there's someone who really enjoys it and they've demystified it and are making themselves vulnerable to be able to share with others, that's an amazing resource to be able to tap into as faculty, as administrators, as university, or excuse me, as college constituents. And of course, the teaching and learning hubs, the 4 hubs that I identified earlier, Central, Piedmont, East, and West, that are run by faculty co-directors who have a part-time release. So they are on the ground as a complement to what is existing at your colleges. And I think that's really important to underscore. It's an additional learning community that exists outside of the maybe 1,000 or 500 people at your college that you work with. There are 8 other faculty who are taking advantage of the resources that happen in the affiliate colleges and being able to leverage that in professional learning for faculty and staff educators. And then, of course, national experts like Achieving the Dream, and some folks may be members of Dream colleges, may also have some affiliation with AQ and the Ascendium resources that happen very frequently. So there's a ton of professional learning opportunities around data-informed decisions. Again, that Sarah didn't know that some of the things that you all have already shared with us has already been evidenced in her comments. And last but not least, she's sharing a little bit about creating that environment of trust. And I think I heard somebody say demystifying or making the space vulnerable for faculty who are learners and staff educators who are learners to take advantage of their own space and their own learning process to be able to make decisions in their courses and their programs that support student success. And you see the final 2, democratizing the data and approaching the data with curiosity. So I don't want to not provide her contact information. So if you are curious more and you would like to reach out, Sarah's information is there. She's also very connected to the work at the Belk Center. She and her colleague, Dr. Jessa Valentine, are actually organizing and orchestrating the research and evaluation efforts that we have specific to the teaching and learning hubs. And so there's always this interconnectedness with the webinar, with the hubs. They're all falling under the Belk Center umbrella and giving us the space to be able to talk with folks who are doing the work, John, April, and Tracie, and kind of leads us to our last question. We're about 9:40, and I want to make sure we leave time for not only this last question, but also any questions from our folks who have joined us. Thank you all again. The third question is, what ongoing efforts and/or support practices can community colleges and faculty members seek out to sustain student-centered decision-making? So we've talked about getting started, the culture. We've talked about providing the space for folks to find community, to make the adjustments. And now we're kind of closing with, how do we sustain this work, the culture, the environment, the momentum? Who would like to kick us off? April, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. So I think first of all, it has to be, to sustain it, it has to be a normal talk. So it has to be something that is accepted to reduce the fear, I think, of data. Oh no. I think as faculty, we have to become very comfortable with reflection. We have to be intentional with the things that we're doing, seeking out the information, but also not being afraid to take chances in coming up with ideas and things to try. And that's part of where the college would come in to support us in that as well. And that's kind of key, to have that, to feel as though you have that freedom to make those decisions. And I think a lot of times it really does come down to analyzing internally and being very critical of yourself. And sometimes we're not very comfortable with doing that. But, okay, so if I tried this and it bombed, okay, let's, what else can we do? And I think as far as some of the things that I mentioned in professional development with the, student learning outcomes, the qualitative and quantitative data and interpreting it, not only that, but my department, we do meet weekly. And I know that's sometimes like, oh, that's a lot of meetings. But we use some of those meetings as well as professional development. So we'll bring in people to help us. And so some of those immediate changes or actions that we've had have gone so far as looking at the data and saying, okay, we need to do something here. And some of those changes have been tilting some of our courses to equitize, to do some equitizing going on, and making students provide that sense of belonging and transparency and knowing why are you doing certain assignments and giving them the, oh, this is used where am I going to use this? We've also, as a department, when we look at those shifts in the data, it has come to, adjusting our pacing. So we treat, we have to look at the hybrid and the online and the different courses differently. So it may be shortening a day here as far as, okay, this section students seem to be getting, we can take some time away from here and look at here's where some of our information is saying, whoa, our scores are trending down. What can we do to get those pulled back around? We've added videos to sections. We've added helps, calculator tips, taking student evaluations and things that they suggest. And we've done an immediate change with formula sheets and adjusting some assignments that we had there. We've added content when we needed adding, of course, I mentioned videos. We've even taken the data when we sit down as a group and looked at, okay, so if you look at it disaggregated that, okay, our minorities are doing better in the 052 course co-requisite and not as well in 043. So why is that happening? Where can we look at, those what's happening to make that, because those courses are set up the same way, right? So we have to kind of really dig in deep, and that's a dig we're currently looking at. And some of the other changes, of course, is we are fine-tuning all of our courses from a lot of the training that we're getting with data and, of course, ADA compliance, but we're looking at going through everything. And so there's been a lot of professional development and support there as well. But, of course, data-driven as we go. So just quickly, those were some things.
Those are perfect. Thank you so much. John, would you like to follow up, or Tracie?
Yeah, I'll go just real fast. So I agree with everything that April said just a second ago. I think that these are the important kinds of decisions that we can make, and this is certainly the culture that's been created at Stanley. A couple of other resources that I might suggest are things like finding the tools that are necessary to be able to support these sorts of decision-making considerations. So for example, we have Blackboard ADA compliance, and we know that we can use that as a tool to be able to get the information we need to be able to effectively support students. I want to go back to something that Dr. Clark said a little while ago, because I think it was really aptly put. One of our biggest resources that we have at the college is one of the individuals in the Center for Teaching and Learning. Joe Pollard is very dogged about asking questions and bringing data to us and just saying, why are you doing this? What effect does it have? What is the purpose of this particular idea or implementation? And pushing us. And I think that that's one of the best things that can happen. We need somebody to push us. We need somebody to ask those questions. April alluded to this just a second ago as well. You need to create an environment in which people can be unafraid to try new things, because you need to create that culture of failure to some degree. People have to not be terrified of failure. If they are terrified of failure, no one's ever going to innovate, because they're just going to keep doing the same thing. And then the data that you provide them is not going to do a single bit of good, because they're going to be afraid to use the data or try to react to the data or utilize it in some way. But at the heart of what I really would like to say here is that you need to not only focus on the students in the classroom. This again goes back to what Dr. Clark was saying. Not only the students in the classroom are saying, why do we need this? But you need that culture as well. Why does this data matter? And you need to address that question at every single step. You can provide people data all day long. somebody like me, somebody like April, but if we don't understand why you're giving it to us and what the reason is and what the possibilities for that data entail, some of the things like April was saying just a moment ago, addressing specific courses, specific sections, disaggregating the data and looking at that and saying, how could we better support this particular student population? You're never going to get the outcomes, and you're never going to get people to utilize the resources that you're working so hard to provide them with. So I think that's it in short. I'm going to hand it over at this point to Dr. Clark.
I'm really just going to lean in on what my colleagues have said, especially the importance of making the data part of the normal conversation so that people expect to hear what the withdrawal rate was for a particular course. People expect in that program review that we're going to talk about completion success rates, that it's got to be a normal part of conversation, but it can't be that scary part of conversation as well. Like, oh no, here come the numbers. That means we're going to have to change. It's like, here come the numbers. Maybe this is an opportunity. But one of the things, and then I'll hush too, but the importance of making the data actionable. And I think that's what we just heard is that we don't want data just for the sake of data, just so that we can say, this is a number and then keep that number on a shelf or on a poster or on a takeaway item. It has to be a number that's meaningful in the work that we're doing so that we can either attempt to make it better, to make it disappear, to make it fill in the blank. That it's important that we don't look at ourselves as the calculators. Let's just spit out the number, understand the number, but how can we really use it? And if it's a data point that we need as a foundation for the work, that's great. But I think sometimes having those questions, making sure we're asking for something actionable, we're using something actionable, gives us the opportunity to build that sandbox that John was just talking about, because it doesn't really do us any good to see the numbers and the trends if we're still stuck in what we were doing yesterday. The data doesn't matter. We're going to do what we're going to do. And so we do have to have that culture. We do have to have that where it's okay to be innovative. And sometimes the innovation is going to take off like a rocket. And sometimes the innovation is going to seem like a dud today, but we've got to let it last for a little while. And then there's the aha. It takes more sometimes than 30 days to evaluate the effectiveness of an intervention. And so definitely, just to lean in on what my colleagues have said there, the importance of making it a normal conversation, making sure that we are making it actionable, we're trying to apply it to our classroom experiences, to the institutional culture.
Very well said. Very well said. It's amazing sometimes as educators and advocates for student success that we will give space and time for other things to take seed a little bit, to grow a little bit before we start to harvest and see the results. But sometimes with these changes, we want them so quickly that we don't allow that space to happen, and that can burn people out. And I think it's very wise to acknowledge that we owe that to ourselves, investing in the work. We also owe it to our students to see that growth happen and give things a little bit more time. Before I kind of give us our takeaways that I think capture the time we've spent together, I do want to toss it over to my colleague, Dr. Strickland Davis, to open up our Q&A. You're still muted, Dr. Davis. I can't hear you, but it's okay. I'm going to jump in. I know your heart. I'm going to jump in for you. This is teamwork at its finest. There are a number of folks who are still with us, and we thank you for that. Are there any questions that you have for our three folks who are with us today, or that you have for others? Maybe there are names that you recognize from the participants that you have a question that you want to pose to our wonderful colleagues. I'm totally okay with silence because I come from a counselor education background. So silence just means people are processing. But while you are processing, you're welcome to unmute yourself. You're welcome to raise your hand or drop something in the chat. I do, as you were thinking, just want to highlight 5 things that I think I'm taking away from our hour together, and in no particular order. They are: look for the trends. This is something that we should do as peers, as individuals, as faculty, as staff educators, as teams or learning communities of people. Look for the trends in the data. The second being create a space where people are not afraid of failure. We say that a lot in a variety of ways that to students, but it's equally important to say that to ourselves. The third being tell why data matters. The fourth being make data a part of normal conversations. And then the fifth being make data actionable and meaningful. So those are my 5 takeaways. And I see that there is a question that was posed in the chat. So I'm just gonna read it out so that folks can answer. What is one suggestion you have to get faculty buy-in for the investment of using and analyzing data to make classroom decisions? And there's no order, so whoever would like to jump in and answer that. And please, if you are in the participant mode and you think you know it, please also unmute yourself. This is communal conversation at this point.
So it's okay if we answer real fast?
Yes, please.
Okay. One of the things that April had mentioned that we're doing here is standardizing our courses or homogenizing our courses. And I think as far as faculty buy-in goes, that's a difficult thing sometimes because standardization can seem very threatening. What, you're going to take away my right to be able to do this course as I wish? And I think that one of the tools that has been most useful to me over the years and implementing that into the English department, where it can be notoriously difficult because people, have their darlings, is that we are not taking away your freedom. We're really giving you parameters. I always use the example of Monopoly. If you want to play Monopoly, there's of course the classic Monopoly board, but there's also the Legend of Zelda Monopoly. There is Lord of the Rings Monopoly. There is even something like Rainbow Bright Monopoly, I think. And so what I'm doing is just giving you the rule set, and you can dress it up however you want to dress it up. And I think when you frame it that way, you get faculty buy-in because they realize that they still have a choice in the process and they can see where their choice is. And I think that helps to implement it. That makes them less miserable as part of this ongoing process, but it can help you to also collect data because now you have a standard from which you can start. And that, again, seems to encourage buy-in. It's been very effective with my particular department.
And I think normalizing, if it becomes part of your daily talk, I think people will buy into the fact that, oh, well, everyone else is doing it, why shouldn't I be doing it? So I think that's important too.
I'll just add in, sometimes it can just be helpful to start with the faculty members and say, what are you seeing? What are you experiencing in your class? What is it that, instead of me imposing a data set upon you and say, figure this out, what do you need to do with it, to kind of turn it around? What are you seeing in your classroom? Having those conversations so that it's something that they've helped to spark and have been part of the initial development of the questions, can also be helpful too, because then they're motivated to get the answers and hopefully apply them.
That motivation is key. There's another question that's in our chat. Many faculty members find it cumbersome and time-consuming to analyze data. Does anyone have any suggestions on methods or ways in which creating efficiencies in their processes for faculty? And if there is anyone who is also participating that you think you have some insight into how to streamline or create methods for faculty access, you are welcome to unmute yourself. Go ahead, Dr. Clark.
I'd love to learn from this question because that's something my team is constantly working on. And the one thing that we have really tried to do more of is the visualization. Before we send a spreadsheet to anyone, I ask, can you make this a chart? Can you make this, just, I hate to take it back to kindergarten because we're not dealing with kindergartners, but pretend your senior VP is one. Can you give me a picture instead of a bunch of charts and figures? It's great to have the spreadsheet on another tab, but can you lead with something that's colorful, something that's pie? I hate pie graphs, I'm sorry, but I'll say pie graphs. Bart, can you start with something like that? That's part of the reason that the system dashboards are great, because they gradually get more challenging with the additional variables. And so how can we start with something, even if it's just an image to show some initial analysis, or instead of giving the raw data, go ahead and these are the high level trends. It's my job as an IE professional to be able to see it and tell you what I see in it, not to have you go through and analyze what I've pulled. My eye is going to point it out and see it, perhaps faster than yours because you don't have the same background and development. So definitely my answer would be to kind of lean on our IE teams to make sure that you're getting the analysis part, not just the raw data. And if there is a way to visualize it, sometimes that is meaningful. I can look at a chart all day. I'm looking at a spreadsheet for days. And so I understand the idea of that being cumbersome and appreciate any ideas or tips with this one.
I appreciated the visualization when reading in general. If you think about how sometimes we talk about research not being accessible, it's because it's so heavy in a language that is not typical, not day to day. It doesn't have meaning. You feel like, oh gosh, I'm in a graduate level course. Sometimes that can be so overwhelming amongst your day. And if you're thinking about a 5-5 course load, or if you're thinking about 7 courses across 2 institutions, that in and of itself is cumbersome. So the visualization aspect, I would say, I echo that completely, is really helpful for folks to see the high level, to get that buy-in. Again, that culture not being an automatic start and stop. Sometimes you have to build culture. And in order to do that, you have to give a little bit of ease and then invite people to join you for a little bit more of the harder work. Dr. Harris has shared that they have an in-house dashboard, they being Belk's Community College, that makes data analysis very approachable. At the beginning of fall of this semester, all faculty and staff receive a weekly data snapshot each week. That's awesome. It's a quick glance at what's happening institutionally, which prompts questions as well. That's a great resource. Thank you for sharing that. And as I wrote in the chat, Dr. Harris is one of the co-directors for the West Teaching and Learning Hub. She serves with Dr. Elizabeth Braun. They're at Wilkes Community College and Catawba Valley Community College. And a great example of how in the teaching and learning hubs, this webinar series still has continued legs, because the work that she's just highlighted, I know is something that they're also sharing within the 16 other colleges in the West Hub affiliate group. We are almost at time. It is 9:58, and I don't want to stifle any other questions, so you're welcome to keep popping them into the chat. But I do want to give you all a brief cursor or commercial about what happens in the spring. We have 5 more dates, and the next date for our next webinar is January 24th at 9 a.m., again, just an hour. And we're going to be focusing on a foundational understanding of steps required to establish, sustain, and see the benefit of a teaching and learning center or work, because not all of our colleges in the 58 are resourced to be able to have their college-centered center, but certainly have communities of colleagues and investors who want to continue this work in a very college-centered way. And we want to make sure that we provide the space to be able to highlight folks who have been doing that in a very well-oiled way, so that there is a North Carolina perspective. Sometimes there's a lot of national aspirational examples, but they can seem a little lofty. And so we are contextualizing that to the great 58 community colleges in our state. It is officially 9:59, and dare I say we can end a minute early. I want to thank you all on behalf of Dr. Strickland Davis and I, our colleagues, John, April, Tracie, on behalf of the Belk Center. Thank you for joining us for our second webinar of this series. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to us by email, and we'll be happy to continue sharing resources. I hope you all have a good afternoon, and also that the rest of November is kind to each of you. Thank you so much for joining us.